Morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, thank you. In just a moment, Mr. Berger is going to introduce our speaker for today, but before he does, I'm just going to ask that all of you, for the next 35 minutes, 40 minutes, just put your phones away. Please take out your earbuds, and make sure that we're paying attention to our speaker today, who is, well, I'll let Mr. Berger explain to you why you should be giving her attention. And the reason that we're all here today. But I think you're all in for a real treat. I got a chance to speak with her for a little while before you all walked in. She's been to a lot of places, had a lot, incredible amount of experiences, and I think you're all going to enjoy that. So without further ado, Mr. Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Nicholson. Good morning, everybody. Just so you guys are all aware, tomorrow night here at 7 o'clock, we are doing the North Penn Alumni Athletic Association Hall of Fame induction, and a part of that each year is a Lifetime Achievement Award, which is really kind of like a non-athletic award that we give to those who have distinguished themselves in various fields, whether it be science or engineering or broadcasting. We've done that over the last several years, and we're happy to do that again this year. Before I do introduce our Lifetime Achievement Award inductee, you guys should know that at the end of this, there will be an opportunity to ask some questions, and we'll do a little Q&A session, so make sure you're paying attention. Something might pique your interest, and just be ready. I'll be walking around with a microphone. If you've got a question for our presenter, we'll do that, all right? So this year's Lifetime Achievement Hall of Fame inductee is a 1973 graduate of North Penn High School. She enjoyed taking genetics, physics, calculus, and advanced bio here. From there, she went on to Lehigh University, earning a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. And then she began a 35-year career at Merck. She worked in a multitude of positions, from a biological technician all the way up to being the senior vice president and chief of staff to Merck's CEO. Among her career highlights included leading the team that launched the asthma medication Singulair. In addition to her career at Merck, she served on the board of directors at the Franklin Institute and the National Association of Manufacturers. Please join me in giving a warm North Penn welcome to this year's Lifetime Achievement Award Hall of Fame inductee, Mrs. Susan Capps Morris. Welcome.
Can you hear me from here?
Underneath the podium.
Okay. I feel like a rock star up here. Well, good morning. Good morning, faculty and students. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I returned here for the first time in 40 years the other day to drop off the video, and it is an amazing, amazing school. And I'm truly honored being inducted into the Lifetime Achievement Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for such a great honor. Now, the truth be told though, I'm planning on another 30 years of lifetime and achievement. So hopefully the award reflects what my next 30 years will be. Now, I sat where you sat some 40 years ago. And as I sat back there, I wondered, as you probably are wondering many times also, what will you do with your lifetime? What will the future hold for you? I can tell you, you have lots of different options, as I did when I sat where you are. But I can tell you, regardless of the path that you choose, you can live an extraordinary life. Today, I am planning to tell you stories about my life, about my career, and some of the key learnings that I've had throughout that journey. And I'll share with you one of what I consider probably the most important thing that I ever learned. And it's something very simple, and it's something that you could do this afternoon. And as I tell my stories, I think you're going to realize that I'm just an ordinary person. And I've had the opportunity as an ordinary person, just like all of you, to live an extraordinary life. So Mr. Berger was kind enough in his intro to discuss a few of the achievements that I've had, but what makes a life extraordinary? What was so extraordinary about my journey? Well, I joined an amazing company, Merck. You probably all know it. You probably have friends and family that even work there. And as a laboratory technician right out of college, and I grew to become the chief of staff for the CEO 30 years later. I became a first-line supervisor on second shift. That's the night shift that no one wants to work. But I became a supervisor on second shift on night, and I grew to leading a dozen manufacturing plants all over the world. I started as an individual contributor, as a technician, and later I had 4,500 amazing employees that worked for me throughout the world with a common goal of making life-saving medicines for the world. I had responsibility for billions, with a B, billions of budget dollars that I used for operations and for capital improvements. And I was a member of the team that brought Fosamax to market, which was the first drug for osteoporosis, which is for brittle bones, which my mother was suffering from terribly, and the drug changed her life. As Mr. Berger also mentioned, I led a team that introduced Singulair to the market, which was a breakthrough asthma medication that even babies could take safely. You could sprinkle it on their applesauce or their ice cream. I've had the opportunity to meet world leaders across the globe, and I even opened the New York Stock Exchange from Davos, Switzerland, ringing in the New York Stock Exchange with a cowbell. I've sat in business meetings with titans of industry. Names that you would recognize would be Bill Gates and Michael Dell. And I've traveled the world, and as you saw on the slides, usually on the corporate jet, which was very nice. And I've had helicopters pick me up and take me to and from work. I've attended charity events that have changed the lives of people around the world, such as through Project Hope. You saw the picture of me with Elmo. That was a food program that we partnered with Sesame Street. Locally, we have the Boys and Girls Club that does amazing things for all of our local children. I've been to the Pentagon and the White House in support of veterans programs. And I was one of the first 300 women that was admitted to Lehigh University. Now, in retirement, I've taken care of orphaned and injured animals, as you saw in some of the overheads, that we take fawns and baby birds. Anything that is wild and lives in Pennsylvania, we would take and care for. But most importantly, I have an amazing family. I've been married to my husband, Vince, for 38 years. We have 2 adult sons and a daughter-in-law, and 2 beautiful little granddaughters that you saw in the picture. Now, as you know, I'm planning another 30 years, but I can tell you that the journey so far was certainly beyond my dreams when I sat where you are today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to tell you personal stories about that journey with the hope, this is my hope for today, that you'll see yourself in those stories. That's something that you'll recognize as part of your life, that you'll see yourself, and each one of you will realize that you have the opportunity to live an extraordinary life. So the question is, how did this happen? What prepared me for this? Well, I promised that I'd tell you what I think was the most important thing that I ever learned that had a fundamental impact on my life and how I saw the world. And it's very simple. You could implement it this afternoon. And it was from a childhood rule I grew up with, we, my 4 brothers, my sister, and myself, we were not permitted to use the phrase, "I can't," because it only meant you didn't want to. Now, we could say we didn't want to, or we would say we're not interested, or we could even say that's too much work, but we were not permitted to say, "I can't," because that's very different. That implies that you're not able. And most of the time, you really are able. Even today, I don't use that phrase because I truly believe that you can do anything that you truly set your mind out to do. And I really encourage you to believe it also. So that's what I think was the most important lesson of my life. Now, there were others too that I think I'll tell stories about. The other key, I think, is be who you are, but work hard at whatever you choose to do. Now, I grew up in a house, I was number 4 of 6 children. So I was often, Bob, Jeff, Nancy, I was always whoever you are, in my mother's words, if she was scolding me. So there's no big egos in a family of 6 children. But we each are different, and we each are unique. And somehow we each found our space in that busy family where we could be ourselves, and that we learned how to communicate effectively, but probably most important, we learned to stand up for ourselves, that we learned to believe in ourselves. In a family of 6 children, this was just survival skill, but these are life and business skills as well. Now, in our family, as we found our place, I was considered the good student. My brothers and sister were all fine students, but I was the good student. And I, like probably most of you, attended North Penn schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. And I really was a very good student. Now, I can assure you it's not because I'm gifted in any way. I'm sure I have very average intelligence. But I will say I worked hard at school. And when I was young, I worked hard and wanted to be a good student because I, quite frankly, enjoyed the attention that I got from my teachers and from my parents. But as I grew up, I realized that my education was going to be the key to life choices. That if I could get a very good education, that I would have choices in what kind of career I could have, perhaps what my earning potential was, where I might live, and what my lifestyle would be. So I always prioritized my studies. Now, I've attended the same schools that most of you have attended. And I will also share with you, whether you know it or not, the teachers I had impacted my life in so many ways, from leadership ability to making good life choices. And I'll give you some examples. My 7th grade teacher, Mr. Kremlick, I don't even know if he's still here, probably not after 40 years, but he made me fall in love with biology. He was a 7th grade science teacher, and I fell in love with biology. It was my major in college, and I spent 35 years in the healthcare industry because he taught me that leaders are passionate. One day he ate a banana standing on his head in the classroom to show us that swallowing was not a gravitational thing. It was peristaltic muscles, and he ate it. He was passionate about his science, and I fell in love and learned that leaders are passionate. Our student government teacher lead in junior high, Mr. Fennemeyer, he encouraged all of us to take risks, lead organizations, invent new ones. I was talking earlier, we invented the first blue and gold night at Penfield through his encouragement. And our goal was to include everyone in the school in some form of competition with the other color. He taught me that leaders encourage and empower their people. Great leadership skill. And another story, Mr. Clavon, my 10th grade biology teacher. I see that there's a scholarship in his name that's awarded. Be a great honor. Mr. Clavon would plant a tree for every prior student he had that was killed in Vietnam. And he would take his classes out to honor these fallen soldiers when he would plant another tree. Sadly, there were quite a few trees, but what he taught me was that leaders truly, truly care about their people. Now, these are all skills that I've used throughout my entire life, my entire career, and I learned them all here, all through this school system. So I encourage you, learn what you can from everyone around you. The learnings are occurring whether you even realize it or not, and not just academically. Listen to what people have to say. You don't have to agree with them, but I can assure you that every time you interact with people, you are learning something about them, but you're also learning something about yourself. Now, the next story, I probably shouldn't even tell. My husband encouraged me not to, but I am anyway. And that was, although I was always a good student, a very good student, I was a handful in high school. I did my share of partying, and I did my share of shenanigans, let's say. I'm sure that it worried my parents and probably upset them. But despite all that, through all those shenanigans, I had boundaries, personal boundaries, and personal values and personal principles that I always lived by. For instance, being a good student was important to me, but also I didn't do drugs. They were becoming very, very popular then. I didn't hurt other people. I stood up for what was right. And I took personal responsibility for myself. Now, trust me, I pushed a lot of boundaries during those times, but I did remain true to these values. And hopefully you have them also, that you know where your boundaries are, that you know what principles and values are important to you. Because when they come in handy is when you're in a spur-of-the-moment decision or choice, that when you have these values and boundaries, it'll guide you so that you can be true to yourself. I also grew up being told and believing that I could be anything I wanted to be. There were no boundaries. Now, my parents used to say they didn't care what we chose, each of us kids, to be, but whatever it was, that we should really strive to be the very best that we could. All of my brothers and my sister and I, we all chose very different career paths. But I can say we all worked hard. And as we begin now each to retire, we also know that through that hard work, that we really did contribute to our companies or to our careers, and we really did help make things a little better. I read an article not too long ago, and it was this huge longitudinal study, a lot of participants, and over many years. And it tracked students from grade school through to their retirement. And the goal was they wanted to find out what differentiated people that were more successful than others. So they had this longitudinal cross-sectional study, and in the end, they published the results. And the biggest factor that made allowed some people to be more successful at whatever they chose to do than others, they worked harder. So there's no getting around it. Work hard at what you do. But Be who you are, believe in yourself, but work hard. Another key learning that I had was things don't always go your way, but the way you handle them can change those outcomes. Now, as you know, I started to work for Merck right after I graduated from college. But what you don't know is that I didn't get a job offer after my first set of interviews with them. Needless to say, I was devastated. But once I got myself back together again, I called the personnel department and I asked if I could come and talk with them about what I could have done differently or what I could do for in the future to make me the successful candidate. I had a great discussion with them. 2 weeks after I went to visit them, I was offered a job. And years later, I was talking with that personnel manager, and he told me that just going and asking for ways to improve and what I could have done differently changed many heads, turned many heads in my favor, and helped lead to the job offer. I look around, I see like about at least 50%, probably more than 50% of the people in the room, I'm a female. Now, it wasn't until I went to college that I really learned that in the 70s, that there were very different assumptions for women and for men, and that there were biases. I went to Lehigh, and what I didn't realize until I arrived on campus was that Lehigh was only in its second year of admitting women to the university. I obviously didn't read some of the fine print, but that's okay, it worked out wonderfully well. So there were 300 women and 5,000 men. And a lot of them were not happy that we had arrived. And they weren't shy about letting you know it. And a lot of the women left, quite frankly. But I liked it, I liked the school, I liked my studies, so I hung in there. I remember in a final exam, we had 4-hour exams, I had to use the ladies' room, and there wasn't even a ladies' room in the building. The professor had to stand guard outside the restroom for me. Not ideal, but I'm sure there's many ladies' rooms on campus today. Similarly, when I joined Merck, I went into the manufacturing area. And when I became a supervisor and moved through some of the levels in supervision, I also found out a lot of people were not happy about having a woman as a supervisor. There weren't many women in any of these roles, and people weren't used to it, and they weren't happy. But I loved the environment, I loved the activities of manufacturing drugs, of packaging drugs. So again, I hung in there. When I would travel, everyone assumed that I was the secretary, and it was always interesting to see faces when they found out that I was the new boss. So as you can see, because of my age and because of the times, I often found myself as the only woman in meetings, in classrooms, in laboratories. But I will also tell you, it never really bothered or frustrated me. And what I also learned is that over time, people really did change their perspective. As a new supervisor, I remember hearing my employees say, they would refer to me as she. She said this, and she said that. Yet over time, she became Sue. It's only one letter difference, but it was a world of difference in their perspective. I was no longer she. I was a real person, and they cared about me. Because change is never easy. Change is never easy for anyone. But I always remained true to myself. I believed in myself. I expressed my opinions and my ideas freely, but I was always thoughtful and caring for other people. And things always worked out very, very well for me. Now, the last lesson that I'll share with you is be brave. Be brave. People will help you along your way. It's amazing. I learned a big secret many years ago, and that is everyone is scared or anxious about what they don't know. People are acting brave, they're acting brave. Everyone has anxiety and is scared of new things. Because if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. You're just idling. And believe me, the things that you are really capable of far exceed what you believe. While I was in college interviewing for jobs, I was a senior, I was offered a plant visit to a great company in the Midwest. And they went through interviews, they invited me to the plant for the final set of interviews. I declined the trip, I declined the interviews. And the reason was I had never flown, and I was scared. I was scared because I didn't know how to get on an airplane. I didn't know how to get through an airport. I didn't know how to get to the hotel. Now, the company was setting up everything and paying for it, yet I was scared, and it stopped me from taking that job interview. I learned if you ask, there are so many people to help you along the way that it should never stop you from doing it. It's true for everything in life. For instance, in the summer after my freshman year of college, my father came to me and said that they couldn't afford for me to go back to school, that I wouldn't be able to go back, that there were unforeseen medical bills, and that they couldn't afford to allow me to go back to school. Now, I was upset, as you could imagine, but I turned that energy into almost a goal of, I will find funding, I am going back in the fall, nothing's going to stop me. And I knocked on a lot of doors. They told me this in July, and I needed funding to return to school by September. I knocked on a lot of doors, but I found a lot of doors opened and a lot of people came to help me. For instance, grants from the state of Pennsylvania. I took the application to our state representative's house on a Sunday afternoon so he could take it with him Monday to file so that we'd have time to get grant money. I borrowed a car and went to Lehigh to their financial aid office all by myself and asked for their help. I was a good student and they didn't want to lose any women, so they worked tirelessly to find scholarships and loans. And of course I worked. Now I will say I didn't have a lot of time for campus parties, but I graduated on time, I graduated with highest honors, and I repaid all my loans. I can also remember as a supervisor on that night shift, I was in a sterile filling area where we filled aseptically filled injectable products. I had a lot of filling machines. Now, I don't know a lot about mechanical equipment. So anytime there was a problem with the machine, I would have to call the maintenance shop and a mechanic would come. I remember the first time when I called the shop for a mechanic, they asked me, what kind of mechanic? I had no clue. I didn't even know there were types of mechanics. So then I realized that if I was going to be able to do my job well, that I needed to partner with the shop. And I couldn't be a mechanic, but I could bake. So I used to bake the shop brownies once a month, took it to the mechanics so that they knew how much I appreciated what they did for me so that I could do my job. And anytime I called, they always came. So I used to just bake. Another story was I was offered a big promotion when I was fairly early in my career to a manager. And I thought that I needed more experience to be able to really do the job well. And I was going to turn the job down. And my husband said to me, "Why would you turn the job down?" And he asked me this question. He said, "Who do you think could do that job better than you?" Now, I still was scared because there was a lot I didn't know, but I did accept the job. And it was one of my favorite jobs of my entire career. Even a friend said to me once, after I had accepted the job, she said, "Do you know how to do that?" And I said, "Well, no, but I'll figure it out as I go." And I did, again, with a lot of help from a lot of people. Now, I was fortunate through those 35 years working at Merck. I always had great teachers and great mentors, and they always did help. I worked hard, but there are always people there to help and guide you. Now, a lot of you have big decisions ahead of you, and you're wondering, what am I going to do? I encourage you to ask questions. People are there to help you. Your parents, believe me, your parents know you better than you think, as well as your teachers. But if you need help in talking about your career plans, there are lots of people out there that will help you decide. But no matter what you decide, I encourage you, go big. You don't even know the capabilities you have. So the key message is, even when all the doors are slammed shut, when you aren't welcomed with open arms, or you really have no idea what to do, there are other doors to go through, and there are always people willing to help you. Times it takes grit and courage, but in the process, you will learn so much about yourself as well as other people, and you'll learn to be able to manage any obstacles. Now, I've told you a lot of stories this morning, and as I said at the very beginning, my goal is that through those stories, if you could take away one idea, because the goal is for me to be able to help you in your life journey, in your decisions. So, wrapping up, you need to grow and learn every day, and it can come from many, many areas. Don't use, or better yet, eliminate the phrase "I can't" from your vocabulary, because you really can. Be who you are and believe in yourself. It's good. And work really hard at whatever you choose. You will make mistakes, and things won't go your way all the time. But how you deal with it can oftentimes take some of those disappointments and turn them into new journeys and new paths. And finally, be brave, dream big. People will help you along the way. All you have to do is ask. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And now you know, I'm just an ordinary person that really has had the opportunity to live an extraordinary life. And I promise you, you can too. Be well.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Morris. Once again, a big round of applause for Susan Capps Morris, our Hall of Fame inductee tomorrow evening.